All the second stage tanks now pressurized. Astronauts report it feels good. T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Like a furry torpedo to the jugular. This is Honey Badger Radio. Radio with bite.
Oh, for Pete's sake, so now my computer's just not going to play because we sat here with it open for so long. Let me...
Oh, unbelievable.
The accuser's
well,
destination.
that's absolutely great.
Cases, many see justice as
oh,
the
it's playing for you.
Playing for you.
Oh, that's just great. It's playing for Karen, but it's not playing on my computer. What the ever?
It's playing
fuck?
for me the first 5 seconds over and over again.
Okay, well, you mute. And I am going to reload SciTube in sexual destination, with the justice system's job being to get her there. Nothing could be in sexual violence cases. Many see justice as the accuser's destination through due process of law, and then acting reasonably and fairly in response to what is found. HBR Talk with Hannah Wallen. Ethical criminal investigation involves unbiased examination of all of the available evidence in an effort to find out what is true, so that any actions taken based on the investigation's conclusion will be fair and just. That begins with the presumption of innocence, so that any determination of guilt must be based on solid evidence, not simply a result of the accusation itself. This has been a fundamental aspect of the U.S. justice system from the nation's beginning. While it is not directly stated in our Constitution, it is an indispensable part of the standard that is due process of law, guaranteed in both the 5th and 14th Amendments. This starting point exists to prevent wrongful conviction of the innocent and to prevent wrongfully burdening individual citizens with the obligation to do the extensive and expensive work of investigation, evidence gathering, and documentation required of the parties saddled with the burden of proof, a condition which would overwhelm the resources of the average citizen when pitted against the resources of authorities handling a case. Our founders wanted the nation's justice system to rely on evidence and logic, not be a machine for railroading innocent citizens subject to prosecutorial abuses. Without it, criminal allegations would easily become a weapon that could be deployed in order to drain an individual's resources and impose harsh punishment regardless of guilt or innocence. This is so vital it's recognized as an international human right under the UN's Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 11, which states, "Everyone charged with a penal offense has the right to be presumed innocent until proved guilty according to law in a public trial at which he has had all the guarantees necessary for his defense." This basic human right is accepted throughout first world nations as an indispensable standard within any justice system. It's a measure of a nation's treatment of its citizens. So why is the U.S. Department of Justice supporting a massive attack on it? Stop Abusive and Violent Environments, also known as SAVE, has been sounding the alarm on the department's funding of a campaign against the presumption of innocence, titled Start by Believing. According to the campaign's website, Start by Believing is, quote, a public awareness campaign launched by End Violence Against Women International, or EVAWI, started in April 2011. The explanation goes on to state, it was created to end the cycle of silence and change the way society responds to sexual assault. Start by Believing reaches friends and family members, as well as professionals who interact with sexual assault survivors. The campaign focuses specifically on changing the response to a disclosure of sexual assault victimization by expressing belief and support rather than doubt, shame, and blame. In other words, it is a campaign promoting automatic belief whenever a woman levels an allegation of sexual assault. We often hear in debate with feminists that this standard, which they've been arguing in favor of for years, would only apply to therapeutic settings. That is not the case with this initiative. From their website, quote, "Most campaigns involve professionals from a variety of disciplines, including law enforcement, victims advocates, healthcare workers, prosecutors, and social service agencies. Depending on your campaign focus, you may also consider local colleges or universities, military installations, local businesses, and more." That's a far cry from limiting the standard to a therapeutic setting. Instead, the group is advocating for a community-wide refusal to give the benefit of the doubt to anyone who any woman accuses of sexual assault. In addition, EVAWI has published guidelines for law enforcement methods of investigating sexual violence complaints with a goal of increasing convictions. As Save Services reported, SBB's effective report writing manual tells investigators to begin the probe with an initial presumption of guilt, and then to 1. Conceal inconsistencies in the complainant's statements. SBB advises investigators to minimize the risk of contradiction by not writing a detailed report for any victim or witness who has already provided a detailed written summary of events. Should there be inconsistencies in witness or defendant statements, investigators should highlight those that corroborate the victim's statement. 2. Make the sexual encounter appear to be non-consensual. SBB advocates making sure the incident does not look like a consensual sexual experience and making the complainant appear more innocent. 3. Slant the report. Investigators should focus on witness statements that serve to corroborate the victim's account. In other words, as highlighted by SAVE, the SBB's guidance encourages law enforcement to manipulate the case to create the appearance of guilt, while concealing anything that might indicate the accusation is false. The article goes on to point out the publication's egregious lie about the intent behind this advice, wherein EVAWI claims their standards aren't about instilling bias, railroading the accused, or causing sexual violence allegations to be treated differently than any other criminal allegation. No bias? Not different? Really? Can we expect, then, that if a woman who has leveled a demonstrably false accusation of intimate partner or sexual violence is accused of filing a false charge, lying to police during an investigation, perjury, or harassment of her target, the same system will start by believing her accuser? That nobody will argue that she is being railroaded? How about if feminist-led organizations that purportedly offer services to female victims of violent crimes are accused of abusing their tax-exempt status by disguising political propaganda outlets as public service organizations? Does this standard apply to them as well, or do they deserve the presumption of innocence? Of course it wouldn't apply. Should feminists face the standard they want applied when women make allegations against men, suddenly its unfairness would become obvious to them and their protests would be loud, clear, and in your face. Supporters of this campaign will argue that it's different with sexual violence allegations, claiming false ones are too rare to be concerned about. If that were true, it would not change the importance of evidence-based investigations. Let's say, for the sake of argument, that only 1 in 100 allegations actually turns out to be false. How does that make any individual false allegation any less wrong, any less serious, or any less harmful to the victim, the falsely accused? Does he suffer less because of the rarity of his plight? Does the supposed fact that other accusers are honest reduce the damage done to this victim's life? How about we apply the same standard to rape? If we get its occurrence down to 1 in 100 women, can we just let it go and not prosecute the perpetrator in that one simply because the crime is rare? Again, I am certain feminists wouldn't accept applying that argument both ways, and they shouldn't. The rational response would be to abandon it altogether, because the prevalence of a crime doesn't determine how objectionable individual instances of it might be. Even if it did, the assertion isn't true. The number is actually unknown. Various studies have come to conclusions regarding how many accusations can be proved false, with estimates ranging from 8% to about 65%, and the justice system has come to conclusions regarding how many accusations can be proved true. That would be the conviction rate. But there is a large body of undetermined cases in between those 2 points. The start by believing narrative is nothing more than a demand that the human right of due process be set aside so that more of those undetermined cases can be put into the convictions category regardless of whether the accused are guilty or innocent. If investigations are to be biased to avoid exposing liars, with investigators more focused on acting as would-be therapists than information gatherers, why even bother going to court? Why not just haul off to jail anyone any woman points her finger at while stating her complaint? We're already in a legal environment in which there are limitations on the presentation of exculpatory evidence and the right of the accused to cross-examine the accuser in sexual violence cases. Now we have the presumption of guilt as a starting point. If an accusation is false, how do proponents of this initiative propose to avoid false conviction and wrongful imprisonment of the accused? Magic? Not railroading? Hell yes, it is railroading, in the most deliberate manner, if not outright binding of the accused to the track and running a train on his civil rights. And they're getting the fuel for the engine right out of the deep pockets of the very government that is supposed to be protecting those rights. It's definitely time to put on the brakes. Hello and welcome to HBR Talk 77, Due Process Matters. Start by being rational. I'm your host, Hannah Wallen, here with she who must be obeyed, Karen Strawn, and the nonsense annihilator, Lauren B., ready to rip the lid off of another feminist can of worms. But first, as usual, we've got a couple of things to go over, like the fact that if you haven't already, you need to head on over to badgerfeed.com and register to receive notifications if you want to know what the Badgers have going on every day. If you want to support our work, even in the midst of all of the financial blacklisting and shadow banning that is taking place today, feedthebadger.com is the most stable way to help. Remember, information is power, and we have it. Go to badgerfeed.com for information, and feed the Badger to support our effort to share that information. And speaking of sharing information, don't forget to smash that like button and share us on every social media site you use. Now that would be excellent. Now, as we all know, because feminists tell us all the time, everything bad like this has to be men's fault, right? After all, feminists have no power and no influence, right?
Of course not. Kill them all and let God sort them out. That's what I say.
Okay, well, I just want to actually draw everybody's attention to a wonderful blog post by at a blog called Data Gone Odd, called "How to Lie and Mislead with Rape Statistics Part 2," and I believe that this blog post is based on work done by the organization that you were talking about in the intro, Hannah, EVAWI, right?
Yeah.
That what they did was they found that 2 to 8% of rape reports were false, right? Under their study, right? So they did an actual study with a number of police agencies, right? But the police agencies that participated in the study, they had to undergo training, right? And so he summarizes the training as follows. A rape report can only be classified as false after a thorough fact-based investigation. A confession that the report was false was not enough to determine it to be false. 2, don't ask the same question twice, so they can't change their story. Even if you find key parts of their story to be false, don't pay much attention to it. Challenging the validity of their report could be devastating to them psychologically. And even if you think the report is false, is it really worth your time and effort to prove that it is? Okay, so this was the training that was given. That, like, they were literally, these police agencies were told, nobody actually prosecutes false accusations. So it's not actually worth it to reverse engineer the allegation to determine whether it was false or not, right? Once you realize there's nothing there, you should just drop it, because it's not worth the resources, because nobody's going to be prosecuted for this crime, right? But at the same time, they could only classify a report to be false after a thorough fact-based investigation. A confession was not enough, right? So here we're looking at this a situation in terms of training that is absolutely 100% designed to minimize the detection of verifiable false accusations. And he said, while the authors present this 7% false report rate as very low, I'm kind of shocked they were actually able to classify that many using these procedures.
And of course, there's been other studies that have higher results.
Here's the thing, too, right? Here's what the study actually found: the unfounded false rate, so that would be maliciously false, right, was 7.1%. But the unfounded baseless rate was 8.5%. So that was women who maybe told the truth about what happened, but what happened wasn't a crime, right? That would fit with the Alexander Wagar case in Alberta that resulted in Judge Robin Kemp having stepped down from the bench. She reported it as a crime. It was prosecuted as a crime, but what happened to her was not a crime. It was just not a crime. In fact, in her police statement, in this complainant's police statement, when referring to the sex, she said, "Oh, I don't actually care when he did that to me. Like I didn't mind. Like I wanted him to do it." She was upset that his half brother had essentially told her, "I'm going to tell everybody you're a big old slut." And that was what she said in the police report, right? And that would have been classified under any normal, reasonable application of the statutes as unfounded, baseless. She feels wronged, but there has been no crime committed, right? Having sex with one guy in a bathroom at a party, and then his half-brother who wanted to get with you and wasn't able to, essentially telling you, "Well, I'm going to tell everybody what a big slut you are," right? That doesn't mean the guy raped you. That doesn't mean that the guy that you had sex with in the bathroom at the party raped you. No, it means you're mad at his half-brother for saying, "Oh, well, I'm angry that you didn't have sex with me, and so I'm going to tell everybody you're a slut," which is also not a crime, right? So no crime committed here. No crime. And yet this poor kid, Alexander Wagar, was subjected to 2 prosecutions over this incident. He was acquitted by Judge Camp in the first instance, right? Judge Camp uttered an unfortunate sequence of 5 words during the trial and ended up having stepped down from the bench. Massive public inquiry based on something that was completely out of context and not even material to his decision, right? And then in Canada, we do have double jeopardy, right? So the prosecution appealed and got a second trial. So this kid, Alexander Wagar, shut up, dog. He sat rotting in jail for more than 2 years, awaiting his second acquittal on the exact same fucking facts, right? His exact same rightfully granted acquittal, because feminism, right? Because it really is. It really should be that the accusation is the conviction. And then when interviewed by when interviewed by the press, the prosecutor in the second trial said that the decision was a miscarriage of justice and it would have a cooling effect on women regarding, feeling safe to come forward with allegations of sexual assault. Keep in mind, her police statement She said, yeah, I don't care when he did that to me, like I wanted him to. That was what she said about the sex in question.
So in other words, now it's a crime to piss off a woman.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and this, like, and here's this thing where, like, literally you have 15.6% of police case dispositions under this regime, under this training regime, right? 15.6% being unfounded. They're either baseless in that way, right? That, yes, maybe they told the truth about what happened, but what happened wasn't a crime, or they were unfounded false.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then this is actually probably the, out of all the ones that are deemed credible, this is the research that has the smallest number. There's the Canaan study, there's the McCann study, and both of them have higher rates. If you go to other countries, you also have the Hindi newspaper did a study on Delhi that actually found a 65 to 85 percent false rate.
False rate.
Yeah, it was because, and here's the thing, right? Like, because they're stuck in a situation where they're dealing with biblical shit, right? You know, like when you actually go into the Bible and you look at the penalties for rape, right? It describes certain things, and there's this one passage in the Bible that says that if a man comes across an unmarried woman of virtue, right, and they lie together and they're caught in the act of lying together, so it's essentially fornication, then he has to pay her father however many pieces of silver, and he has to marry her by law, and he can never divorce her. Right, so this was actually something to protect. It was like it was the biblical version of a shotgun wedding, right? There were other passages that dealt with rape in terms of if a woman is raped within the city, if a woman claims that she was raped within the walls of the city, and no one heard her cry out for help, right? Then she is considered to be complicit in the act. She's considered to have consented to the sex, right? If a man comes across her in a field away from earshot of other people and she makes a claim of rape, then he will be put to death and she will be allowed to go free with her honor intact, right? Okay, so we have these things, right? But this one passage where it's like, if a man comes across a woman and he seizes her, right? And they use the word seize in the exact same, with the exact same verbal language, where Potiphar's wife seized, so like you're literally talking about seduction, right? Seized and convinced, right? Took physical hold, embraced somebody and convinced them, oh, shut up, to have sex with you, right? Okay, completely different language being used in this, but because the word seize, shut up, appears to be something non-consensual, and all the feminists are like, oh, well, women were forced to marry their rapists. I will kill you, dog. Under biblical law, right? Shush, Borat. Enough. Oh, my God. But this is just essentially two kids playing in the hayloft, right? And dad comes up and catches them, and then he loads his shotgun and runs them both up to the altar, right? And the only one actually forced to do anything in this situation, right, is the man. He's forced to marry her, and he's forced to never divorce her. So you're looking at a situation like that, right? And this seems to be the crux of most of the cases, because the original statutes haven't caught up with the feminist idea of consent, right? So the original statutes around rape were, if a man has sex with a woman without her parents' consent, if a man has sex with a woman outside of marriage,
that's
right? If a man has
things.
sex with a woman promising her marriage, but his parents don't grant him permission to marry her.
Yeah, that's one of the things in India.
The
the statistics included breach of promise to marry. The statistics included instances where the kids had eloped and the parents objected, so they filed a rape report. And if I understand right, the statistics included the parents arranged a marriage and the woman didn't want to be in it, and so she filed a report.
Yeah, well, or and also they had consensual sex and then she got pregnant, or the neighbors started to talk. And so she brought the report to coerce marriage out of him, even though there was no breach of promise to marry, because there was no promise to marry.
Promise to marry.
Yeah, there was essentially an issue where she was just like, well, I regret my decision because it's having some social fallout for me, so I'm going to bring this in order to coerce marriage out of this man.
Yep, and this is in India and in the United States, we have in common that there is an attitude along those lines. Well, in India, the statutes kind of the statutes haven't caught up with the feminist idea of consent there, but at the same time, it's not legally rape to break a promise to marry in India. So those end up in the false rape category, the false rape accusation category over there. But here in the United States, we have this issue of, feminists have basically taken mens rea out of the equation. So instead of the crime being defined as the act of contravening the victim's right or ability to refuse sex, it becomes sex without the victim's consent. And then they have basically obscured the meaning of consent and moved the goalposts on that further and further toward the idea that the woman is not responsible for any kind of communication whatsoever, and the guy is responsible for all of the communication involved in the act of obtaining consent. And then if she changes her mind later, she can say her consent was invalid because the conditions have changed, or because the conditions don't suit her interests. So if she gets pregnant and she didn't want to be pregnant, she can accuse him of rape. If she was cheating on her boyfriend and she gets caught, she can accuse him of rape. And now we have this thrown into the mix where the SBB guidelines are based on trauma-informed questioning, like trauma-informed interviews. Well, if you just changed your mind, that's a far cry from the trauma of having your right or ability to refuse contravened, having somebody use force or coercion to prevent you from being able to refuse, to walk away, to say no, and any of that.
I think we lost her.
I think we did.
No, you guys. You guys couldn't hear me, but they could.
All right. Well, we can hear you again now.
Okay.
Or I can.
Okay. Well, it's just OBS. OBS does this thing where it fluctuates, and so it broadcasts at a high rate for a while, and then it broadcasts at a low rate for a while, and then goes back up again. So I don't know if it's my internet connection or if it's a problem with OBS itself. It's not being updated anymore. So.
Well, who the hell knows? Like, okay, but here's one of the things too, right? One of the examples, right? Cases determined to be baseless include those that do not meet the elements of the offense and those that were improperly coded as a sexual assault in the first place, right? They give an example. An adult woman is coerced into having sex when her boyfriend, who said he would break up with her if she doesn't do what he asked, right? So essentially, a man who says, well, I didn't freaking get into a long-term relationship with you so that I could never have sex again. And, you know, like, I'm sorry, but this is this is a deal breaker. Right? And she complies with his wishes so that he doesn't break up with her. Right? That's considered to be, those are the types of offenses that get reported as sexual assault. Right? And that's what feminists want. They want those types of offenses to be reported and recorded as sexual assault, right? Even though I'm sorry, nobody, no man or woman, enters a long-term relationship thinking, oh, I hope I never have sex again. Like, what the fuck is going on, right? And I'm sorry, but saying, you know, I'll break up with you if you don't have sex with me, well, you know, maybe you should just fucking let him break up with you.
Yeah, if you have two different attitudes regarding sex and what constitutes a relationship and everything, it's better to find out and break things off than it is to just basically do what you think. And this is another one. Feminists act like women don't have the capacity to choose to not do something if they find out somebody else wants them to do it, which is bullshit.
Oh, I know. Oh, it's so fucking unbelievably, like, it's so patronizing. It's so condescending, right? This idea that I don't have the capacity to say no. I was freaking 16 years old. I was
Okay. Now the reconnection is successful. So Karen can tell her story. Sorry.
Yeah, no, like he was like the most sought after. He was like, oh my god, he was so hot. And you know, we're getting frisky in the grass, and he says, well, you know, you don't want to go through with it. Well, I just don't think that you're going to be able to walk away from this, right? And I was just like, oh, you think? And I just walked away. I walked home in my bare feet. Right? I was just like, you really think that? Like that's really what you think? Is that I can't resist you? I can't say no to you? Like, no. No, I can say no to you. Here, listen to it. No. Goodbye. And off I went, and I didn't suffer any kind of social repercussions off of that. You know, like there was no revenge scheme in his mind or anything like where are these parents teaching their daughters to have a backbone? Where are feminists teaching women to have a fucking backbone and essentially put their foot down? Oh, you know, like this is like the Aziz Ansari thing, right? Like, oh my goodness, right? He asked me if I would go down on him, so I did, and in that, you know, like my hand and my mouth were moving on his dick, right? And then, you know, I stopped moving my hand because I felt really uncomfortable and I didn't really want to do it, so I stopped moving my hand. His dick was still in my mouth, and I was still sucking on it, but I stopped moving my hand, and he didn't catch on to my nonverbal cues that I was no longer into this. And so he's the bad guy. He's the villain. And I'm like, his dick was in your mouth, bitch. Like, what the fuck? Oh, you stop moving your hand. Like, do you know how many times I jerk my boyfriend off every day? Several times. You know, at my arm cramps, I stop moving my hand, you know? How is he to know that you stop moving your hand because you no longer want to be participating in this sexual encounter? Right? How is he supposed to know when you're still sucking his dick? What the fuck? Women! Like,
really
how is this empowering? How is this fucking empowering? Why didn't she just say to him, like, I don't want to suck your South Asian dick. Like, maybe on the second date, not on the first. Like, why didn't she just make her wishes known?
What's really dumb about that is feminists make this
I don't
big
like
deal.
your taste in wine. I don't like your taste in wine, so I'm feeling a little bit weird about the dick sucking thing. Like,
what's really dumb about that is feminists make this big deal claiming that women understand nonverbal cues and women understand what other people mean without having to hear it. Women are intuitive and women are empathic and all of that, and men aren't. But then men are demonized for, in that one particular situation, just that situation, when sex is in question, suddenly they're responsible for being all of the things that feminists say women are better at and men don't have.
Oh, yeah. No, men just they're just not good at picking up signals. They're not good at picking up nonverbal cues. They're not good at like all of that stuff. They suffer a little bit in terms of the empathy department, the cognitive empathy department, right? The affective empathy department, they are at least as good as women, but the cognitive empathy, putting yourself in someone else's shoes, understanding what they're going through, reading their social signals, all of that stuff. They're a little bit, they have a deficit there. And then these women are like, oh yeah, I just don't understand why you didn't pick up on my cues, like by BFF, lifetime BFF, like since we were in kindergarten. She would have known what I meant when I stopped rubbing my hand up and down your dick, but kept it in my mouth, right? She would have understood what that meant, and you didn't. And so therefore you're like a horrible person. And it's like, well, okay, so what you're describing with these men is that they have a social handicap compared to you, right? They have a social handicap compared to you. They are less capable compared to you, and yet you're holding them to a higher standard than they're capable of. What the fuck is wrong with you, right? Isn't that ableist? It's like that stupid bitch on that one freaking episode of The Agenda with Steve Paikin that I was on about white privilege and all of that, right? There was this brown woman, very, very physically attractive, socially savvy brown woman in tech, right? She doesn't actually do any tech. She just like advocates for women in tech, right? Because I guess that's what women in tech is advocating for women in tech. Anyway, so she's there and she's talking about, well, women walk into like a room full of cubicles where men are like coding and they got nerd shit up on the walls and, and they're all socially awkward. And these women just they don't feel like they're welcome. And I'm like, you're talking about a room full of fucking autists, you bitch. Yeah, that's like an able-bodied person walking into a room full of paraplegics going, your wheelchairs make me feel uncomfortable. What the fuck is wrong with you? These guys have social deficits. That's like a verified fucking fact. It's empirical reality. Men who go into tech and women who go into tech often, like way disproportionately, have social deficits, right? And the women, the neurotypical able-bodied women, right? Attractive women who go into these fields and they walk into a room full of men on the autism spectrum and they just didn't do enough to make me feel welcome. And it's like, they're fucking autists. The hell is wrong with you? Why are you asking that people make their wheelchairs invisible? Like, I'm just like this is really what it is. It is really like, why can't men be more like women?
Yeah, I think women are generally like naturally passive aggressive. I believe that anyway. And I think something else that comes into play is plausible deniability. You just pretend like you don't know what's really going on around you, and then you can have your way. But it's just crazy.
No, it's like the plausible deniability thing. That is so much 100% part of relational aggression, right? Relational aggression is women's form of aggression. It's like, I'm going to start rumors. And I'm going to start them in such a way that nobody is going to really be able to pinpoint exactly where the rumor started, right? Nobody's actually going to be able to be held culpable for the destruction of this person's social reputation, right? I'm never going to be answerable for that, right? So it is the allegation, and it is proxy violence, right? If you make an allegation, if you intentionally and maliciously make a false allegation against somebody to the police, what you are asking is for the police to act as your accomplices in a conspiracy to commit kidnapping, illegal forcible confinement, illegal forcible restraint, and assault and battery. That is what you are doing. You are luring the police as your unwitting dupes, your own personal mafia, right? You're doing nothing different than if you told your brother, I want you to beat up my boyfriend because he pissed me off, right? I want you to beat him up and lock him in the tool shed for 3 days, right? That's what I want you to do so that he'll learn, right, how I'm supposed to be treated, right? So doing that, right? But we don't see those things as violence. We see them as lying to police or filing a false police report. We don't see them as violent felonies because it's legitimated by the fact that women get the police to do this stuff for them rather than their mafia brother or their new boyfriend or whatever, right? Somebody who doesn't have the legitimating authority of the state behind them, right? And the consent of the people to enforce the law, right? So essentially, they are doing nothing different than if they essentially said to their new boyfriend, I want you to off my husband, or I want you to get rid of him for me. I want you to get him out of the house, right? I want you to engage in threats and assault and battery and kidnapping and all of this stuff to get him out of my hair, right? If it's all based on her lie, her malicious lie, then that's all it is, right? But we don't see it that way. And there's plausible deniability. Oh, well, you can't necessarily prove that I was lying in every single aspect of my police report. And so I can get away with that. And so like it literally is. It is all about passive aggression. Passive aggression and relational aggression is engaging in aggression without consequences. That is really all it is. Right. And then you got Darvo for the women who get called on it. Right. So, you accused me of being abusive. That's so abusive of you to do that. How could you do that? How could you do that to somebody that you claim you love? Right. Accuse me of being abusive. That's just like horrible, horrible. Like, what kind of horrible person are you to accuse me of that? Right. So, I mean, like, this is like, there is a whole fucking ton of shit that women do, right, and can get away with that, like, men just don't have the option, right? A man can't accuse a woman of raping him and expect that she's going to spend any freaking amount of time in jail. A man can't accuse a woman of domestic violence and expect that she's going to be the one arrested rather than him, right? A man can't harness these tools, these social and institutional tools of proxy violence. So he doesn't. I have no doubt that if these tools of institutionalized and proxy violence were available to men, that more men would use them. I'm sure that more men would, right? But they're not. And that's what women use. And women use it because there's very, very little risk of consequences. This is like almost no risk of consequences as long as I don't tell you what you did to piss me off. And this is one of the things too that I said to Tommy Sotomayor the first time that I did an interview with him was, being with a man, being in a relationship with a man means never having to hear, if you don't know what you did, I'm certainly not going to tell you. Right? Well, that's a form of proxy aggression. That's a form of passive aggression. That's a form of I'm not going to be accountable for my own feelings. If you don't know what you did, I'm certainly not going to tell you. Right? That's just like the woman's playbook.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, when you goad that person into confessing to something, and then she can use that to say, yes, that's exactly what you did. It's mind games. That's all it fucking is. I could never do that to someone. I have to be honest. I can't lie about. I don't know. Anyway, I'm shutting up.
Well, the really terrifying thing now is that we're seeing this passive aggression, this double standard, and this tendency to essentially use emotions as a weapon like this. We're seeing it written into law now. And this is only the latest, and this isn't written into law. But the biggest problem with this Start by Believing initiative really is that it has been lent credibility by funding from the Justice Department, and basically what Save Services, what Stop Abusive and Violent Environments has highlighted here. This initiative has had almost $500,000 in funding. It's had like $400,000, and a great deal of it has come from the Department of Justice. And so what we're basically seeing now is where feminists will tell you they have no power and no influence. Feminists will tell you that women are not responsible for any discrimination that men face in criminal court, that feminism has nothing to do with the discrimination that men face in sexual violence cases. Yet it is feminist dogma that is informing the more recent manuals on investigation, this trauma-informed policy that they're bringing out now, is essentially these types of attacks written into law. I don't have to tell you. I can tell the cops later, and you will get in trouble. And if you accuse me of lying, if anybody accuses me of lying while they're attacking me, I'm the victim. And there has been, like, there was a letter, an open letter from 150 professors and legal experts that was published, and it's actually linked in the article, and the article is of course linked in the transcript for the opening video. But this, according to this letter, you know, like, they've just ripped this apart. They're pointing out numerous issues with it, including the fact that it doesn't give police who are investigating a rape case any way of handling when there are open and obvious contradictions in the woman's story, or when it's obvious that she is lying. Like, they don't have an approach for that, because they're not allowed to recognize that a woman could lie about being raped.
Oh yeah, no, and it's like there's an article on Quillette published 2018, October 4th, right? On the fallibility of memory and the importance of evidence, right? And it found that, because they went and they looked at the figures for the Innocence Project, right? And 70% of the wrongful convictions were the result of the victim and or one or more eyewitnesses wrongly identifying the perpetrator. So it was all down to eyewitness misidentification. And then they took a smaller sample of 22 cases, 9 of which were rape, right? And 52% of victims actually knew the wrongfully convicted person prior to the crime, and yet still misidentified them. Still pointed the finger at someone who was not the perpetrator, right? So you're looking at, and victims themselves, right? Eyewitness misidentification played a role in 70% of convictions. Nearly half of those misidentifications, 46%, involved multiple eyewitnesses identifying the same innocent person. And eyewitness testimonies of victims are far more likely to play a role in wrongful conviction than those of bystanders. It should be noted that in the case of sexual assaults, this is particularly attributable to the prevalence of cases in which there are no non-victim eyewitnesses. Out of 71 people wrongfully convicted of rape, 73% were misidentified by an eyewitness. 92% of these misidentifications were by the victim alone or both the victim and a third-party eyewitness. So you literally have victims being 4 times more likely to be the person who misidentified the perpetrator, right? So you're looking at a situation where victims are actually less reliable than bystanders in terms of their eyewitness testimony, their eyewitness accounts. And if you look at some of the psychology behind memory, right? This idea of flashbulb memory, right? The event is so incredibly, powerful, right? That it becomes like a flashbulb memory. It's like a photograph on your brain, right? But no, because every time you recollect, every time you retrieve a memory, you edit it. You edit it and then you put it back. And so traumatic memories tend to be edited more over the same span of time than non-traumatic memories. So you're actually more likely to be able to positively identify somebody who, was standing in front of you in the line at Walmart and you got to chatting with, than you are to, after 3 years of time, than to identify the person who raped you, right? This is like, it's absolutely like this entire freaking thing. You can actually put a man in prison just on your word as a complaining witness. I'm sorry, but that is not enough. That is not enough. It should not be enough. And and the fact that what we're actually looking at is we're actually looking at not only getting to the point where in a sexual assault case, only the complaining victim's word is necessary. If her testimony appears to be more credible than his, and there being no physical evidence, then we're pushing judges and juries to convict based on, a balance of probabilities, not a reasonable doubt. We're just based on credibility. He doesn't seem as credible as she does, right? And so we're encouraging that, but we're also basing these convictions on zero physical evidence. There are convictions of people, right? Wrongful convictions of people that are not based on physical evidence at all. There is no, it's just the victim's testimony versus the defendant's, right? Or the complainant's rather testimony versus the defendant's. And the judge makes a decision as to who he finds more credible. And I'm blown away by this. How the fuck did we get here? Like this is not okay.
This is the opposite of what our justice system was designed to do. In fact, it's supposedly
our system was designed to protect the innocent from the power of the state.
Right.
That's why the burden is on the state. That's why people are not expected to prove their innocence. The state is expected to prove their guilt. And in various jurisdictions, I'm blown away by the dog and pony show some of your U.S. states have going, where discovery goes both ways in criminal cases. What the fuck is that?
It's bizarre.
It's bizarre.
And
in Canada,
the
only person who has an obligation to hand over all their evidence to the other party before the trial is the state.
And that's the way it should be. And what we've got going on down here is really bad. Our justice system has a tenet in it that the more serious the crime, right? The more serious the potential penalties, the potential consequences for that crime, the higher
the more you should have to be.
The higher the standard of proof, the higher the standard of evidence that on which the conviction has to be based. That's supposed to be standard within the justice system. Karen, you got to mute for a minute so I can finish what I'm saying. That's supposed to be standard within the justice system. That we the higher or the worse the crime, the more egregious the crime, and the more severe the penalties that we are going to apply to a convict of that crime, the higher the standard of proof. And in cases where we're looking at, say, a first-degree murder case, and they want to give the death penalty, or they want to give life in prison as the penalty, they need a unanimous guilty finding, and they need they need a much higher standard for evidence. It's beyond a reasonable doubt. And if I understand correctly, the jury has to agree on the penalty as well. Where in a lot of lesser cases, you have judges imposing penalties without a jury necessarily approving the penalty and so on. And here we are with feminists. They want the standard for proof for rape cases to be somewhere along the lines of minor crimes, right? They want a prevalence of, not prevalence, but basically the 50-50,
what's it called?
Preponderance of evidence standard, yeah. They want the preponderance of evidence standard that you use in minor crimes, but they want the penalties for those crimes to be as serious as homicide. They want people, in fact, they want it to be more serious than homicide, because you can commit a homicide, and if it is not like a first-degree murder, there's a chance you might get out of jail someday and walk free, and that's it. You have a probationary period, you're on parole for a period of time, and once that's over, you are a free citizen. Whereas with respect to...
You're not on a registry anywhere.
Right. With respect to sexual violence, there's a lifelong registry. There is a system that alerts your neighbors to your crime for the rest of your life. It's not for most of these registries. You're supposed to be on it for a period of time, 8 years, 10 years, 12 years, whatever. But there's always an excuse within the system. Well, we're not going to take this person off the registry because we haven't battered them enough yet, basically. And so for the rest of your life, you have this scarlet letter on you over a crime that you were convicted of, potentially on a preponderance of evidence standard that normally only applies to minor crimes. So which is it, feminists? Is it a major, reprehensible, animalistic, life-impacting, violent crime? Or should we use the preponderance of evidence standard that we use for minor crimes?
Well, and the thing too that bothers me is that when you actually look at, and this is one of the things that got Paul Elam into trouble, right? When he wrote his, I will nullify. If I'm ever called to serve on a jury for a rape trial, I will nullify. I will acquit. I will vote to acquit no matter what I have seen, even if all of the evidence put before my eyes is evidence of guilt, overwhelming. Right? I will vote to acquit. And you know why? Because I'm not seeing all the evidence. I'm not seeing all the freaking relevant evidence. Or if I am, I have no way of knowing that I am. Right? And this is another thing. This is another way that they're trying to do an end run around justice is not only do they want the burden of proof to be essentially lowered, but they also want to have like huge, massive discretionary powers to exclude evidence of, exculpatory evidence, right? So you have a situation where, like in Canada, with Bill C-51, and it was an omnibus bill, and it involved 3 major instantiations of precedent into Canadian statute, right? So you're looking at RVJA, RV Ewanchuk, and also another precedent in terms of being able to, essentially what they want is, because previously, right, rape shield laws essentially meant that, okay, so if you had a history as a slut, that doesn't mean you consented to sex with this particular guy, right? So you can't bring in your history as a slut. Yeah, sure, you banged the entire football team except for this guy willingly, and then this guy raped you, and we can't bring in the fact that you banged the entire football team other than this guy, right? We can't do that. We can bring in his prior actions as showing a pattern of behavior, but we can't bring in your prior actions as showing a pattern of consent to sex, right? Right. And okay, so that's questionable enough, right? But now what Bill C-51 is going to do is it's going to, and here's the thing too, right? It was lied about in the press. It was lied about by lawyers who still practice law in the press as to what it would do. Andre Marin, who's a practicing attorney in Toronto, I believe, he wrote an article in the Toronto Star and the Sun, the Toronto Sun, saying that, all this is going to do is make it so that bring the sexual assault law into the 21st century, because these rape shield protections, they were written before email and chat rooms and messaging apps and text messages and all of this stuff, right? So all it's going to do is essentially bring us up to speed with the technology, right? So what you're thinking is, well, okay, so if a written document or a recorded conversation on like, magnetic tape, right? Like cassette tape, would be admissible as evidence, or would be inadmissible as evidence, then if it was recorded on a cell phone, right, or through an email exchange, it would be equally inadmissible. No, that's not what the change is, right? All of those things were already covered by rape shield protections, right? If it had to do with, she banged every member of the football team but the defendant, and she wrote about it to her friend, and it got spread around the school by text messages and stuff, none of that would have been admissible, even with the law as it stood before this bill, right? None of that would be admissible because it's her prior sexual history, right? And it's inadmissible. It would have to be subjected to a rape shield test, right? What he's talking about is if she texted you or sent you smoke signals or communicated you through cups with strings, or maybe through Morse code, that she really wanted to have sex with you tonight, 2 hours before the incident in question, and then after you left her room and went home, she emailed you, or maybe sent you a message through Semaphore, or I guess Pony Express, or snail mail, or handwritten little note carried by a messenger pigeon, right? If she sent that to you saying, "Oh my God, that was fucking awesome, let's do it again real soon," right? That would be inadmissible because that would be a communication of a sexual nature or for a sexual purpose. That would be subject to rape shield tests.
And there's
right? Okay, and on top of that, Bill C-51 would also give rape complainant standings in these pretrial hearings to do the rape shield test. So whereas before you had this sort of, you had at least the pretense of distance between the evidence and the complainant, right? Because yes, the prosecutor would get to review the evidence, but the prosecutor is not legally permitted to disclose any of that evidence to the complainant. They can adjust their strategy. They can decide to ask certain questions and not ask others based on the existence of that evidence if it becomes admissible, right? But the complainant doesn't actually get to see that evidence and get to know, right? And so basically, like, remember, Hannah, you were kept out of the courtroom for almost the entire fucking trial, the Honey Badger trial.
Yep.
Why was that? Because hearing the other evidence, being witness to the other evidence, might taint your testimony, right?
Yeah, we weren't even allowed to discuss it.
Yeah, no, not even allowed to discuss it. And here we are, right, in a situation where a bill has been passed and it has gone through the Senate and gone to royal assent, where complainants in sexual assault cases will be able to review the defendant's exculpatory evidence prior to the trial. What the fuck?
Yeah, we're in a situation in the United States where they're trying to get the same thing And they're heading for it, and they're heading for it in a more roundabout way. They've been doing it for years. And the Save Services sort of has an article running this down, or giving a rundown of this. And the article is titled "How Rape Laws Remove the Presumption of Innocence." Now, there's also been an attack on exculpatory evidence. I'm of the belief that both sides ought to be able to, like, if somebody's got a criminal history, yeah, sure, enter it into the case. If somebody's got a sexual history, enter it into the case. The attorney should be able to effectively argue what evidence is relevant or what evidence is not relevant that they're looking at. So if somebody's criminal history is shoplifting, a good attorney ought to be able to say, well, somebody that's a shoplifter isn't necessarily a rapist. And the store isn't in any way, shape, or form related to the incident, and the same thing with the sexual incident that Karen described. If somebody has sex with all of the guys on the football team in 1982, and then in 1983 this new guy comes along and is interested, and she says no, that's her prerogative. If she has sex with the entire football team all in one night, and which would have been a hell of a feat with the football team at my school. We had a lot of kids on the football team. But if somebody did that, and then they come back later and say, well, but when this one guy did it, it was rape, there is reason to question that. It's a completely different situation. And those two situations should not be equally kept out of court. They should both be equally entered into court. Those two situations are both evidence. One of them, the defense attorney or the prosecuting attorney could easily argue, well, just because she did something a year ago with this group of guys doesn't mean that because this other guy becomes a part of that group that she owes it to him too later on. Well, at the same time, in the other instant, the defense attorney should be able to argue, when did she say no? As she's going through this group of guys, and she was obviously involved in group sex, for her to come back later and say one of the guys wasn't welcome, you would think she would have told some of the other guys, hey, keep this guy out, and they would have done it. So the idea that evidence shouldn't be admitted because it's embarrassing to the accuser is really damaging to the accused in any court case, to the defendant in any court case. You make your choices, and you should be able to go into court and explain them. And if it was any other type of case, if somebody came in and accused an individual of holding up a convenience store, and the person had been a regular shopper at that convenience store, they're not going to be able to use the argument, and they could make the argument in court that they go in there and get stuff all the time, but they're not going to be able to convince anyone that entitles them to go in with a weapon and hold up the register. And at the same time, if you have a cashier that's regularly slipping somebody money out of the register and they get caught and they turn around and say, well, this person was stealing from me, I've been coerced, I've been held up, I've been robbed, that's not going to be a convincing argument either. And they're not going to be able to use, well, this is embarrassing to me, you shouldn't be able to use my transaction history against me. That's not going to fly in court either. But we have a whole series of things that have happened here that are like that.
Well, I do, I do want to say, because I read a paper that essentially was looking at 40 years of rape reform laws. I think that might have been a part of the title of the paper, right? 40 years of rape reform laws, right? And it described one case. It described a whole bunch of specific cases, right? And how the rape shield laws had impacted the admissibility of evidence in those cases. And the one that really struck me, and I don't know whether this guy was convicted or not. I don't recall the paper actually indicating the results of any of these trials, just the results of the judge's rulings on these specific pieces of evidence, right? And one of them was it was in the 1980s, before DNA evidence. The defendant was black. The complainant was a single young white woman. She sat, and so you're looking at, in the social context, right? Shacking up wasn't really that prevalent at the time, and interracial dating wasn't really that prevalent at the time in the U.S., right? So you're looking at this white, young, unmarried white woman on the stand, and she says that when the rape occurred, and she was absolutely adamant it was a black man, that she was living, she was not sexually active, she was not dating anybody, and she was living at home with her mother. When in reality, both the prosecutor and the defense and the judge, like all of them, knew that that was actually not the case. At the time that the rape occurred, she was living with her black boyfriend. Okay? And sexually active with him. So the only piece of evidence in this trial, physical evidence, was a black pubic hair that was found on her cervix. Right? A pubic hair from a black man found on her cervix that could not be identified as belonging to any particular black man. Right? And the judge allowed her perjury to stand as fact before the jury, because if it was allowed to be challenged, it would come out that she had actually been living in sin with a black man, and that would have caused her embarrassment.
Yep, we have mentioned that one before, and that's the kind of thing that ends up causing false convictions on a regular basis. You can't question a woman's story when she's lying, because she'll be embarrassed that it comes out that she's not squeaky clean, crystal clear, and what it results in is, it becomes easy for a liar to walk into court and hide the details that would expose the lie about the innocent party she's trying to have wrongfully jailed. If she just uses, her own embarrassing details of her life as a shield. And this is something, like, it's interesting that they call them rape shield laws, as if they are shielding rape victims, when in fact what they're actually shielding is false rape accusers more often than not. In our modern society, we're not going to see people go into court and sit on a jury and decide that a guy has the right to rape a woman under some circumstance or another. It's not going to happen. And they're not going to decide that a woman's refusal isn't valid. She can prove a refusal. She can prove that she said no. She can prove that she resisted. Any of that. They're not going to look at it and say, well, since you had sex with this guy before, it was okay for him to rape you. They're not going to look at it and say, since you wore a short skirt, this guy wasn't doing anything wrong. That's not what's actually behind the feminist push for these changes in law and policy. What's behind the feminist push for these changes in law and policy is they want women to be able to go in and say, this guy did this, and him to have no defense at all.
Well, the Department of Justice in Canada actually, on the post that they made, the public information post that they made on their website over Bill C-51, that was their stated intention. Their stated intention was to close off as many avenues to an affirmative defense that any defendant could actually bring, right? So you're looking at a system that just, it's kind of like when somebody explodes themselves while yelling Allahu Akbar, and everybody's like, oh, I don't think he did it for Islam. I think he did it because he was mentally ill, or he did it because of American foreign policy. No, he literally told you before he blew himself up, right? He literally, like, this is what I don't get, right? I don't get that. I don't get this whole idea of, oh, well, we can't blame Islam because he wasn't doing it in the name of Islam. He was doing it because he was mentally ill or because of this, that, and the other thing, and American foreign policy and blah, 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 right? Okay, so it had nothing to do with Islam, right? Right. Even though he says his motive, he calls out his motive before he detonates himself, right? Okay, and when it comes to the Department of Justice in Canada, they literally came right out and said, we want to pass this bill because we want men to have no defense against a charge of sexual assault. That's what we want.
Yeah, and
that's what we want.
They're bringing it down here too.
Bringing it down here too.
No viable defense, no viable affirmative defense, no defense at all against a charge of sexual assault. We literally want every man accused to be convicted because that's what we want. And it's like, and I'm thinking like it's in black and white. It's there. They literally stated it, and everybody's like, oh no, that's not what they meant. And I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? Are you fucking kidding me? Right? Oh, that's not their intention. Yeah, they just told you what their intentions were. They just told you. Why are you not believing them?
That's not when you're supposed to believe.
Believe the woman, but don't believe the Department of Justice. Christ.
Yeah, no, you can't believe Department of Justice. I'm going to take us through a few of the super chats because they're starting to pile up. And then I want to take a look at some of the text that is... well, there's a couple of things, but we'll do the super chats first. At the beginning of the show, when we were having all of our technical difficulties, the DCV Titan gave us $2 Canadian and said, if there were no tech issues, it wouldn't be HBR. Then he gave us $2 more and says, running a train on, phrasing. That's from the opening monologue, and I will say that was deliberate. I did do that on purpose. 100% on purpose.
Yeah, pun. And,
I mean, yeah, I am the pun master in chief. So, but yeah, then we have the Great Indoors gave us €5 and said, anybody remember the Strauss-Kahn case from 2011? He was the head of IMF at the time and a political opponent of Sarkozy from the 2012 French election.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, I remember that. He got to do the perp walk because he was arrested in the States. He wouldn't have been forced to do a perp walk in France. But, yeah, no, I vaguely remember the details of that case. And it was, it was essentially like, it looked like a takedown. It looked like an organized takedown of somebody who was in a position of power. Right? And nothing really amounted. Like, nothing really came of it, if I recall. Like, it'd be kind of like the Jussie Smollett case if the Chicago police had decided not to disclose that he made the whole thing up. It just kind of was the front page news for like months, and then it just kind of disappeared. In some ways, Harvey Weinstein is like that. Front page news until like certain aspects of the court case aren't going in favor of the accusers, right? And then it's like, oh, well, are we going to really report on this? Well, maybe not.
Yeah, as soon as the case starts falling apart, it's not useful anymore to the individuals that were making hay with it before, so they're not going to report on it. Exactly. It'll be hard as hell to find information on that case as time goes on. If it's going the direction, if it continues going the direction it's going now, and if the outcome ends up being what I think it's going to be, barely anybody will report on it, and people will end up having to wonder what happened, and maybe one or two outlets will report with outrage, just absolute outrage, that this is solid proof of the rape culture we live in, that a man can prove his innocence in court, and we have to do something about that.
Oh, fuck, now I remember. If he had said not Dominic Strauss-Kahn, but Nafissatou Diallo, I'd have been like, oh, that bitch. Yeah, no, she was a chambermaid who claimed that he, like, violently sexually assaulted her when she came in to clean his room at the Sofitel Hotel in New York. So essentially, a semen sample was found on the maid's shirt that matched Khan, and yeah, investigation. Prosecutors eventually filed a motion to drop all charges against Strauss-Kahn. The Nafissatou Diallo had a history of lying for her own benefit, and she essentially she was an immigrant worker who was chambermaiding, who was also collecting welfare for 8 children instead of the 2 that she had, or something like that, right? So she'd lied to get into the country. She had lied to welfare to collect more money than she was entitled to. And she was also working, so she shouldn't have been collecting welfare at all. And yeah, like she was completely not credible. Like she was not a credible person. She was a liar, pathological liar. Lie. Oh, but I'm telling the truth now. And it's like, yeah, no, don't believe you. And she, they dropped the charges. Inconclusive physical evidence. So essentially there was a little bit of semen on her top. And the police couldn't determine how it got there. Like, who the fuck knows? Maybe she blew him off for money after she was put up to it. And she also, like, was involved in conversations with people who were in prison who were maybe being paid to, like... So it actually looked like a setup. It actually looked like this guy had been set up to take him out of the running in politics. So... Yeah.
Well, and if he had the habits that you mentioned, well, she could have gotten it off the bed.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Could have gotten it off the bed.
Yeah, if they couldn't determine how it got there, there's no evidence that it got there during any kind of activity between the two of them at all. Going on, Mr. Rovato gave us $2 and said, Hannah, you're echoing. Second, Carrie said Frisky. Classic. I'm echoing because all of Karen's headsets and earbuds and everything are broken. So
they're all broken and eaten by dogs.
Yeah, so if you guys don't want us echoing, somebody's going to have to send Karen some earbuds. But then we go on. Mr. Roboto gave us $2 more and said the honey badgers are a true treasure to honor. And I thank you for that. I think we all thank you for that. That's really sweet. Sierra DeFlora gave us $10 and said, I'm a high-functioning autistic girl. I can, quote, pass as NT these days. I click with guys, but interacting with other girls in a social setting outside the workplace is like a damn minefield. I agree. It
depends on the girls.
My daughter says the same thing. She's like, well, I understand why girls behave the way they do, but I actually have to think about it. So I'm always like trying to play catch up. Just even in a conversation, she's always trying to play catch up. So she just essentially she's got a very small number of friends who are girls who she hangs out with, and that's pretty much it, right? She has her guy friends and she has her work friends, and that's, yeah, she has the same problem.
Yeah.
Yeah. Same here. I learned this lesson the hard way. The people that you meet at work that you consider your friends are not necessarily always your friends. And, I am the same way. I don't necessarily get along very well with women. I just don't find it. It's not an easy thing for me.
12, 11, 10,
and,
9.
I was looking back on my career and thinking about any person that has tried to take me down or get me fired, or they've all been women. the only people who have ever tried to help me learn or advance my career have all been men. It's only women who will try to tear you down when they see you're doing better. And now I'm in a position where the place that I'm at now, I started at a lower position within the company, but I always knew that I had plans on doing other things. This is my career. I got a job to get in the door, and I knew what my career path was. So it was within 3 months that I had gotten a raise. Another 2 months, I've gotten a promotion. Another 2 months, I got another promotion and a raise. And the woman who I was working under when I first started there, now she can't stop spreading rumors about me. She can't stop talking shit about me. You know, it's everything out of her mouth is how I'm unprofessional. And, you know, meanwhile, I even talk about this woman. Nothing about her. Nothing good, bad, indifferent, or otherwise. I don't behave like that towards people. You know, I'm not that negative, backbiting, two-faced kind of person. You know, I'm genuine. I approach people with honesty. I will treat you how I expect to be treated. And time again, every female, not every, there've been a very small handful, but more often than not, it'll be women within the, you know, in my workplace that will try to bring me down before any man will. And it's sad, but it's true.
Well, the thing to do about that, when you have somebody who is bad-mouthing you behind your back, and especially like to your coworkers and everything, this person saying rotten things about you. Oh, she did this. She acts like that. I don't like this about her. I don't like that about her. Your best bet is not to fight back at all in any way, shape, or form, because as soon as you do, you become the aggressor and you confirm everything she's saying about you. But if you just continue doing your job and you just continue, you know, acting as you normally would, and engaging in your customers, engaging your coworkers and everything normally, and you're a good worker, and you're good with your customer service, and you do a good job, your quality of your work is good and everything, eventually she will self-destruct in the workplace, and she'll blame you, because I've had that happen to me every place I've been. One gal has done that. They go through steps. Step one, they get jealous of what you're doing and how you're doing it, or how well you're doing it, something about you. Somebody gets along with you really well, and they want that person to get along with them really well, but they don't. Even minor things like that. I had one coworker get jealous because I was popular with the customers. Well, I was popular with the customers because it was my job to interact with them. I was the front line interacting with them. And so I made it my job to make everyone coming in that door feel comfortable and welcomed and wanted as a customer in that store, because that was my job. And, you know, and I had great people coming in. I had a lot of really nice customers, so it made my job easy. And because they all liked me and they'd ask about me when I wasn't there, she considered me some sort of social butterfly, which I thought was absolutely hilarious, because I'm not. You know, you usually find me on the side of the room at any event, not out in the middle with the, you know, people that are the most popular people there. It's very odd for me to be in the forefront of any social anything anywhere ever. So I ended up in that situation where, you know, step one was her starting to bitch about me being a social ladder climber, and everybody had to explain to her that it was my job to interact with the customers, that was part of it. And then she decided it wasn't fair that our positions at work had specific job descriptions, that we were supposed to fulfill those job descriptions, and everybody didn't just get to switch out all the time. And so only I got to be popular with the customers, which also wasn't true. There were cashiers that were incredibly popular with the customers because they were nice to them. And you know, and it went on from there. And she went through a series of things she bitched about. Then she started soliciting complaints. So at night, she would say, this person's being mean to me. I need somebody to come in and complain to my boss about her, because if I complain, they won't listen to me. I'm so victimized by the situation. Not realizing, of course, that a lot of the people that came in at night were customers that saw me at other points during the day and knew me. So that this ended up backfiring spectacularly. People came in and started telling my boss that the night shifter was soliciting complaints about me. And then she started complaining to corporate and making up stories. And at that point, our coworkers got angry, and one of them decided to sort of get revenge on her. And I was completely oblivious to all of this. I didn't know anything, so I had no idea what she was talking about when she came and asked me if I had heard the rumor that didn't exist, that only happened because he started denying that it was true. That being that something that she was accused of having done that was very unprofessional. And once that occurred, she started accusing me of starting the rumor, and then eventually got herself in trouble with the company and quit to avoid getting fired. So she just basically melted down. And I've seen that over and over again with folks at work, with women in social settings, with women in school, and with women in among my close friends. And it's just, if you try to defend yourself, like I've been in that situation where I've tried to defend myself, and the result of trying to defend yourself is that everybody suddenly says, well, maybe she has a point, because now you're aggressive too. But if you just keep your chin up, and keep doing your thing, keep doing your job, and when people ask you about it, you know, you say, well, I don't know what she's talking about, but she hasn't said anything to me about it. I haven't been engaged on this issue, but she's welcome to come and talk to me about it. I mean, you know, and be as conciliatory and accommodating and, you know, as humanly possible. That will just result in the end of the relational aggression, one way or another. It becomes ineffective at that point.
I will never give her the satisfaction of caving in and stooping to her level, because again, you know, I have no personal problems with this woman, none at all. So the fact that she is coming at me so hard, it just proves everything that I've learned about this woman over the year and a half that I've been working with her. Okay, she's very unhappy in her own personal life. You know, her marriage has problems, and you know, this is no surprise because she's very vocal about these things. You know, she will come in. Here's the thing about her, right? She'll call me unprofessional, but she will happily sit up and tell her employees about how much she likes black dick.
Oh my
God. Yes, and talk about how she believes her husband has another family on the side. You know, she talks about how she brags about how they live in a $1 million home and how much money her husband makes, but he's never around. You know, it's so very clear that she is just personally unhappy and unsatisfied with her life, and she is lashing out at anyone else, anything that catches her ire, and it just so happens to be me right now. Which, okay, fine.
You don't have a dick.
She can't. Exactly.
Well, okay, but you know, I just wish I had you ladies' problems, because you know what my role has always been throughout the entirety of my working life, the anointed mediator. So anytime two people have some kind of conflict, anytime somebody needs advice about how they're having problems with their job, problems with the boss, problems with this, problems with that, you know who they fucking go to? They come up to me. I'm just sitting there smoking outside the back door of the fucking restaurant, right? And what do? They're like, hey, you're my psychologist. I'm totally not paying you $180 an hour to counsel me, but I need counseling.
Oh, I get that too.
Me too. Me too.
Trust me. And,
I don't know. Maybe I'm just golden then in terms of like I'm the one MRA who has never been protested. I am the one woman who has never been subjected to like a freaking character assassination campaign at work by another woman.
You have been protested. You just haven't been posted individually.
Yeah, well, okay, but I'm jealous. Janice got a protest. She got several protests, right? Warren Farrell got protests, right? Paul Elam got protests, right? Everybody gets a protest but me. In fact, when the one fucking time protesters showed up to an event of mine, they were protesting Vladimir Putin's treatment of gays in Russia. Not me. And you know why they were doing it? Because they were like, we don't want to make the news people interested in what's going on in there, because they might take their cameras in there and actually give these people the time of day. So let's just draw the news cameras that are in there out with our big protest of homophobia is wrong.
And that Vladimir Putin is totally going to see and respond to, because it was where?
University of... no, it was Ryerson, I believe. Ryerson University in Toronto.
There you have it. We totally have Vladimir Putin's attention on Ryerson University because he hasn't really got anything else to do.
He's not running a country.
Well, I mean, like he's just like sitting with his feet up on the desk, smoking a fat cigar, probably Cuban, some fucking commies. So
absolutely, and wonder what the hell is going on at Ryerson University today. Let me put on turn on the Putin Ryerson watching satellite and see if there are any protests that I should be changing my mind about things because they're happening. And totally not, created to act as a distraction from any other things that are going on campus that day.
Not just on campus. Inside the building they were protesting in front of.
Of course.
Yeah. Of course. Yeah. There you go.
So our next
they were only there for like 20 minutes because it was fucking cold.
Oh, those are some stoic feminists.
Yeah, no, they're dedicated. They're dedicated. They were there for 20 minutes, gave their interviews, pulled the news cameras out, and then they went their merry way back into their nice heated dorms.
Well, they didn't want to get lost.
Provided in part by the Canadian taxpayer.
Yeah, they didn't want to get lost because all the other snowflakes that were going to show up falling down from the sky would have totally made it difficult for them to find each other in the storm.
Oh my God! Stop with the puns. Oh Jesus!
There you have it. Karen thinks I'm Jesus. Meredith Glassberg gave us $10 and said, if an able woman were to acknowledge that the room full of tech geeks were autistic, then she would... That would mean losing her victim status. It's all about power, and those tech geeks are easy targets. And that's another good point. One of the problems that I have with a lot of feminist activists and a lot of feminist advocates, especially like the ones on Twitter, is you cannot hold them to one standard. Like if they have a statement they make about the nature of men and masculinity, and then they have a statement about that they make about what they think they should be rightfully able to expect of men and masculinity. You cannot ask them to reconcile the second statement with the first one, because it's an attack to them if they're asked to remain consistent in their between their standards for people and their assertions about people's nature. This person has no legs. How dare he not walk to the store and get some bread? You just said he has no legs. Well, that's no excuse. I'm sorry, but yes, it is. Stop attacking me for my words. Well, maybe you should use the Nancy Pelosi that said it? The Pelosi-Omar defense. She has a different experience in the use of words. Saying there's your excuse. But yeah, it just blows my mind that they cannot recognize when they have set one standard for what we are supposed to believe about the nature of men, and then they turn around and their standard for the expectations we are supposed to have for men's behavior rely on their first standard, their this is the nature of men standard, being completely false. Catherine Stolly gave us $5 Canadian and said, women have the illusion of being less violent because they tend to get other people, mostly men, to do their dirty work, while men do it themselves. The DCV Titan gave us $2 Canadian and said maybe it was the magical spunk fairy regarding how the semen got on the shirt. Obviously, it was the knock-up fairy, and the knock-up fairy missed. Then we have a super chat from Schrodinger's Cat. Schrodinger's Cat gave us £5 and said, as to the workplace, there are 3 rules. 1, work hard. 2, keep your nose clean. And 3, don't let the bastards/bitches grind you down. And that is true. So I want to go on to a segment of the VCI open letter. The VCI open letter was a letter written by 150 professors and legal experts in response to the trauma-informed standard and the changes that were being requested, the attacks on due process in law and policy. So this is an open letter regarding inequitable, victim-centered practices. And they start out by quoting Kennedy saying, the great enemy of the truth is very often not the lie, deliberate, contrived, and dishonest, but the myth, persistent, persuasive, and unrealistic. And the myth that I want to address here, they talk about trauma-informed theories. And the one of the myths that is consistently relied upon when we discuss trauma-informed theories is that the science that feminists are using as their basis is settled and credible. And in the letter, they have pointed out, like, it starts out, that section of the letter starts out by saying the victim-centered investigations rest upon an easily discernible ideological foundation. That trauma-informed theories represent an attempt to impute a veneer of scientific respectability to the broader Believe the Victim movement. So it's not actually a scientifically proven thing that this should be used. It's just basically using, well, if we call this scientific, then you have to accept it. They go on to point out this relies on anecdotal reports. It originated with anecdotal reports. The reports came from a 1974 survey of 92 forcible rape victims' self-reported symptoms. The authors classified the symptoms in 2 stages, fear or terror, followed by efforts to reorganize their lives. So basically, when you have something horrible happen to you, you try to figure out, what can I do to keep this from happening to me again? And that's your efforts to reorganize their lives. That survey has been, according to this letter, the focus of sharp criticism, highlighting definitional problems, biased research samples, and unreliability because the inherent complexity of the phenomenon vitiate all attempts to establish empirically the causal relationship implicit in the concept of a rape trauma syndrome. In other words, they can't basically, the study can't be trusted because they're defining things differently than would be reasonable, because they selected specific research samples to get the results they want, and because honestly, it's very difficult to empirically prove cause and effect after the fact in a case of trauma, where you say your avoidance of particular things or your awareness of your surroundings and things like that are absolutely 100% caused by that experience.
Okay, one thing I want to say too is, right, they would use my, like, because I did a blog post about my
real quick, let me add, because this is going to add to your point. In the very next sentence, they point out that the credibility is also compromised by the survey's failure to distinguish between victims of rapes, victims of attempted rapes, and victims of molestation. And there is a significant difference between all three of those experiences. Go on, Karen.
But what I want to say is, like, they would actually use that survey, that study would probably have actually used my experience as a denial of trauma, right? Because I essentially said, in my blog post, and this is essentially how I experienced my assault, was, okay, so I made some stupid decisions. I knew that the decisions were stupid while I was making them, but I made them anyway, right? And I knew, like, I was getting into a situation where I was asking for trouble, right? Okay. And then I was sexually assaulted, and I managed to get myself out of the situation. And then when I was walking home, I went over all of those things that I did, all of those dumb decisions that I made, right? That if I had made a different decision, none of it would have happened. If I had actually listened to myself when I was saying, this is a really dumb thing that you're doing, right? If I had actually listened to myself and done what I was telling myself to do, which was to, like, don't do that, that's stupid, right? I would never have been put in a position where I would have been assaulted. And so because I was able to actually go back and sort of in the aftermath, right, when I knew I was safe and I knew I was going to be okay, and it was like, phew, that was close, right? I went and I said, okay, so what did I do that contributed to my vulnerability to that situation, right? That made it so that I could be assaulted in that way, victimized in that way, right? And then I was like, okay, well, I don't actually have to be dumb anymore. I can actually make wiser choices in the future, so I don't feel in danger. I don't feel in constant danger, right? And so these people, they would be telling me that, oh yeah, no, what you're doing is you're adjusting your life, right? Like you're taking these drastic, horrible measures in your life that you shouldn't have to because of this trauma, or you're denying this trauma. And it's like, no, I'm not denying that it was traumatic, right? I slept just fine that night, even though it was traumatic. And I'm not making excuses for the guys who did that to me at all. I'm just essentially saying, well, I can't fucking control anybody else. I can only control me. And hey, if I had made different decisions, I would never have been in the position for these guys to have done that, right? And they would not have been really, really crazy, like put on a burqa and like lock myself in the house kind of decisions. They would have just been like, don't be a retard decisions, right? And so I was just like, no, like, I'm fine with this. Like, I can, like, if I'd known at the time that, if I had known that most men who rape are repeat offenders, I probably would have reported them, right? But at the time, I didn't know that. Nobody had told me that. That was forbidden knowledge. It's still forbidden knowledge. And so I just was like, well, it was a close call. I got out of it. Good thing. Won't ever do that again. And if I never do that again, I'll probably be fine, right? So like, but these people, like, they're like, oh well, if people actually, if victims actually try to get on with their lives, right, that's not okay. That's not okay. I don't understand why that's not okay, but apparently it's not okay.
Well,
I'm supposed to be traumatized for life.
Feminists have
some groping. Some guys pawed my tits and tried to get my pants off when I was 15 years old. Oh my God.
Feminists have asked us to fail to distinguish between the woman who figures out that there are dangerous people in the world and she should be prepared to defend herself or take reasonable measures to avoid being vulnerable to them. That we're not allowed to differentiate between that and the guy who can't go to the 4th of July celebration because the fireworks are going to trigger memories of his experiences in a combat zone.
Agreed. You know, like, and here's the thing too, right? Like, because I had this recent freaking fiasco with Dana Michael Fash, right? Dana Michael Fash is a guy who, when he was 16 years old, right, he lived across town, right, across the city from me, from where I am right now. He kidnapped a 65-year-old woman, took her into her apartment, and raped her physically and with objects until the hospital wasn't sure if she would make it. And then a couple weeks later, he abducted some 50-year-old woman who was working. She was working as a janitor in a building at night, and he went into the building and he raped her until to the point where, you know, the hospital wasn't sure if she would make it, right? And then he was sentenced as an adult. He was tried and sentenced as an adult, which is unusual for Canada. And served 12 years for that. And then he got out, and then he went back in, and then he got out and he went back in, and he got out and he went back in because he could not comply with his parole conditions, right? And every time he was put back in, he was put into the remand center, which is where my mother-in-law works. She's a guard there. And he decided he was going to sue her for misconduct, not to actually do a lawsuit, because he dropped it as soon as he got her contact information and her address, right? The address where she lived, which is where I live now, right? And he had a grudge against her, and he started stalking her. Every time he was out, he started stalking her and showed up at the house a few times. And then they nabbed him for raping and torturing a woman to death 5 blocks from where I live. Right? They nabbed him for that. And for whatever reason, there was changes in the evidence, and they had to release this guy. And they released him. This is why I didn't go to Fort McMurray for the red pill screening, because I literally just had found out that this guy was released. This guy who made my mother-in-law change her phone number, unlist it, have it be a blocked number, all of this stuff, right? Had her install a security system and cameras and everything else on the property, because every time he got out, every time he was released, which was frequently, right, he would come around and start harassing her, right? And the only reason I think why he didn't actually assault her, because he has a thing for older women, obviously, is because she's a frickin' prison guard, and she's a seasoned prison guard, and she just frickin' does not put up with that shit. And so essentially, as far as he knows, this guy knows, and he was just released because the police fucked up or the prosecutors fucked up. Somebody fucked up, did something unconstitutional. This guy, the charges have been stayed in this murder of this woman. And he's been released. And so, you know, my mother-in-law was like, okay, well, he's been released, and obviously somebody fucked up, and so you need to take precautions, right? So I didn't go to Fort Mac because I wasn't going to leave my kids alone in the house while I went to Fort Mac with this guy out and about. He never goes more than 9 days without violating his parole conditions in some way or another, whether it's through assaulting somebody or you know, just drinking or doing drugs or something else that he's not allowed to do, right? And so, but what did I do? I told my kids, okay, so here's the thing, right? Here's the thing. There's this guy. He's out in the neighborhood. He's got a grudge against the woman who used to live in this house, right? If he shows up, here's what you do. If he shows up at the house, you slam the door in his face, you lock the deadbolt, you let the dog out of the crate, if she's in the crate, right? You grab the landline and you phone 911, right? If you can't grab the landline, use your cell phone. But if you have a choice, use the landline, because there's caller ID on that shit, right? And they can pinpoint your location. And then you go hole yourself up in some freaking corner of the basement, right? That's what you do if he comes to the house, right? Because, like, I don't fucking know. I told my daughter, if you're walking home from work and this big, gigantic, fat guy with shoulder-length brown hair, right, tries to get hold of your throat, if he gets hold of your throat, I'm going to advise you to act like you've been attacked by a cougar. You got cougar attack training when you were a kid. You know how to fight off a cougar. You know that you have to fight a cougar off, right?
Cougar attack training?
Yes. We lived in a fucking neighborhood where bears dug up and ate my tulip bulbs, right? And cougars would be sitting in the fucking middle of the fucking intersection a block away from my house.
Tales from the Canadian land, Canadian land
just
wilderness.
Sitting there in the middle of the road, waiting for an animal, like a dog or a cat, to walk by so they could get a meal, right? This is where I lived. So my kids had to be trained. They had to be trained on how to deal with bears. They had to be trained on how to deal with cougars. And I was like, if this guy gets a hold of your throat, you are fighting for your life. You are fighting as if you are being attacked by a cougar. You cannot play dead. You cannot go along with him. You cannot do any of that. You are fighting for your life, right? And you will do everything in your power to resist his attack, including kicking him repeatedly in the face, right? Kicking him in the testicles, freaking squeezing his nipples, anything you can think of to do, you do it, because that's what you need to do. If he gets a hold of your throat, because that's how he always starts his attacks, right, of these women, was he grabs them by the throat and then they just go along with what he says. And then, oh, geez, they regret it. Or maybe they don't live to regret it, right? And I'm just like, Rachel, you know, you walk home at midnight from the freaking bus stop. This guy's like wandering around in Edmonton. Like, we don't know where he lives. We don't know anything. We just know that he has a bone to pick with the woman who used to live in our house, and he thinks she still lives here.
It's too bad he didn't pee in the street somewhere. Then they'd alert the entire neighborhood.
Oh my God. Well, they won't actually, this is one of the things, it's a thing with Canada. They won't actually tell you where these people are. He's on a sex offender registry. He's in a halfway house as far as I know, right? So he's still under supervision, fairly close supervision, but, and he's already been back to jail once and then been released again. But, essentially, like in Canada, we're kind of of the opinion that the sex offender registry should not prevent you from becoming rehabilitated, right? It should not be a barrier to existing as a rehabilitated individual.
It shouldn't.
Right? So that applies to him as much as it applies to anybody else. So they're not going to tell anybody where he's living. They're not going to tell anybody, you know, any of that stuff. They're just going to, they put out a warning saying, you know, if this guy actually like approaches you, you might want to be cautious, be careful, right? the police rarely put out warnings like this, but they were like, yeah, we had to release this guy, and yeah, you might want to be careful around him.
See, that's very different from here in the United States. There have been instances of people who have been attacked and injured. There have been instances of people who have been run out of town. There have been instances of people, if I understand right, there have been instances of people who have been murdered because their residence was basically shared with their entire neighborhood, as well as their criminal history. Their criminal history included something like a sex attack, or that they had molested children, that they were pedophiles, and the people in their neighborhood decided that they were going to get them out of the neighborhood, and somebody actually ended up going after them. And then I know in the UK there's at least one guy who was murdered after being released from jail, because he was murdered by somebody who knew his criminal history, because it had been released to the neighborhood. And you know, it's a situation where it's very hard to have sympathy for somebody that's done reprehensible things, but committing a murder still makes you a murderer, even if the person that you're murdering is somebody who has done reprehensible things.
Yeah, no, and like, honestly, like, if he comes to this house, right, he's gonna get a face full of fucking trimmer line from my weed whacker that's plugged in at my front door. He's gonna get a nasty surprise, right? But like, I'm not gonna go seeking this guy out. Like, I honestly, I think that if he can actually, you know, and here's the thing too, right? Like, he's of an age now. Like, the crimes that he committed were committed in the past, right? And the ones that initially got him put away, the more recent one has not been proven, right? But the ones that initially got him put away, he committed at age 16. He's now like, what, 35 or something like that. Give him another 10 years, he's going to be too tired to freaking make trouble, right?
Or at some point, he'll eventually have to learn that revenge is just going to get him into more trouble.
But it's essentially like, you have to actually be able to, you know, if you're not going to lock people up forever, right? And this is a guy, if they could prove this third charge, right, this sexual torture and murder charge, right, if they could prove it, because this was like over the period of days that this woman was sexually tortured before she died, right, in an apartment building 5 blocks from me. You know, if he could be convicted on that, if there was enough evidence to convict him of that, I would say go ahead and declare him a dangerous offender. Absolutely, 100%. A dangerous offender is like Paul Bernardo. He's never getting out of prison. He can apply for parole every couple of years for the rest of his life in Canada, and the parole board can say, yeah, no, we're not letting you out. You're staying in forever. Like, we don't actually have such a thing as a life sentence in Canada. There is no life sentence. A life sentence in Canada is you can be released after 15 years or something like that, 12, 15 years. But we do have something called a dangerous offender status. And if you have dangerous offender status, we can keep you in prison forever. It's hard to get that status applied. It's very difficult. But you can do it. Paul Bernardo is an example. He's been declared a dangerous offender, and he will likely never get out of prison, right? Unlike his wife, Karla Homolka, who got out after 12 years because of a cushy plea deal between her and the feminist Attorney General of Ontario. But what you're looking at is you're looking at a situation where, like, I don't trust the criminal justice system. I do trust my mother-in-law. I absolutely trust my mother-in-law, right? Who dealt with this guy, you know, she dealt with him in his cell. She dealt with him, you know, on a daily basis for years, right? That he is not somebody that I want coming around my house. And he's somebody who might come around my house because he thinks she still lives here. So, you know, honestly, it's like, it's a very complicated thing. But essentially, I just like that. What I did in response to that is I didn't go online and start demanding, you know, get a petition set up to have this guy put away on false pretenses, on trumped up charges, on anything like that. No, what I did was I put my weed whacker by my front door and plugged it in, right? And I told my kids how to make themselves safe, right? And I stayed home the weekend after he was released, right? And that's what I did.
And that's a rational response to trauma or potential trauma, you know, or to danger, basically. Feminists want women to not have the capacity to have that rational response. And what you end up with...
They should be able to walk naked back and forth in front of Dana Michael Fash and be perfectly safe, because society should make that happen.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, what you end up with is this situation where we are now informing the policies of our law enforcement agencies regarding how they handle sexual violence allegations, using not just junk science, but known junk science. And this is something that there have been legal experts that have concluded that rape trauma syndrome is not generally accepted by experts. This is not necessarily confirmed as a real thing. It's not a syndrome. It's not like PTSD. They're pathologizing rational responses to real threats as if they are the same thing as naturally occurring trauma-related irrational responses to echoes, basically, of past threats. And it's not the same thing. It's not the same thing to not be able to go someplace because the sounds there are going to remind you of something that happened years ago, as it is to know there's a bear around the corner, and if I turn the corner, it's going to eat me. So I need to take measures to protect against this bear, and either I'm going to find a different route, or I'm going to get some means of defense against the bear. I'm not going around that corner unprotected. That's intelligent behavior. And you know, and the other is something that you have to learn to deal with, live with, overcome, or otherwise mitigate its damaging impact on your life and your ability to socialize and work and so on. And so we're in a situation here in the United States now where they're starting to nudge us toward Canada's is it Bill C-67?
C-51.
C-51. Bill C-51, where it's going to be designed to prevent any vetting of a woman's accusation. And all I can see that in terms of this happening is there's the first step. We now can't vet accusations. And then the next step is, well, if we can't vet accusations of sexual violence, why don't we do the same thing with domestic violence? Well, you don't really need to doubt women when they say they've been abused. And then we'll take it further in our society, right, with other types of criminal allegations. Because, I mean, if you don't have a right to a robust defense when a heinous crime like rape is on the table, why would you have a right to a robust defense if you're merely being accused of failing to pay the IRS $500 that they could just have you pay and get it over with?
Or shoplifting or something like that. Yeah. No, it's like it's absolutely like I'm blown away by the fact that, you know, the ACLU that they actually embrace this sort of they embrace the Me Too thing. They embrace all of that stuff right now, and it's like, what? Sorry, Emmett Till. What? Like, really? That's where we're going here. That you know, when you look at something like Christine Blasey Ford, right? And Brett Kavanaugh, and you have people who, you know, are saying that, you know, like she was credible. Well, no, she wasn't. According to a prosecutor, a seasoned prosecutor with a history of putting men away for domestic violence and sexual assault, said that her claim did not even meet the burden of he said, she said. It did not even meet the burden of preponderance of evidence. Yeah. Right? And you still have people saying, well, he should not only have been denied his Supreme Court nomination, but he should also have been put away in prison over that. Right? And I'm just like, are you fucking kidding me? Right? And I watched those hearings, right? Like, I know that there are not a lot of people, including people who were speaking definitively on it, like Brett Weinstein, and Jordan Peterson, speaking fairly confidently on it, in terms of, you know, well, if Brett Kavanaugh gets the nomination, he should step down. He should, you know, recuse himself and essentially kill his career, right? Resign, and stuff like that. And I'm like, you guys haven't fucking been watching those hearings, because I've been watching those hearings, and everything I saw in those hearings, right, was she could have been telling God's gospel truth, right? But the way she was telling it, that was an act. That was an act that was put on. That was absolutely 100% all of her, like, to appear to be on the verge of tears for hours, yet not need a single tissue, not dab once at your eyes. I'm sorry, right? And who got choked up? Who was the one who got choked up, got over emotional, started crying, spent the rest of his testimony sniffling, right? And then needed a tissue. Yeah, that was Brett Kavanaugh, right? And I don't think he took freaking drama in university. I don't think he was a drama student. I don't think he took freaking method acting classes. Right? No, he was really actually freaking emotionally upset about it. And maybe he was lying his fucking teeth off, but his emotions were genuine. She could have been telling the God's gospel truth, right? But her entire freaking performance was put on. It was an affectation.
There's a YouTube channel that I can't think of the name of, but it's basically something like body language. Yes. Yeah. So, and I remember that video, and she's just so on point. Everything that she said about Christine Blasey Ford was just on point. You know, the way she tilts her head and the way her eyes are. You know, she's her voice is like, you know, she's verklempt, but yet not one tear. You know, absolutely an act.
Yeah, no, it was just like she was coached, and he wasn't. He was obviously not coached, because, you know, if you look at the responses to, you know, from the left, right, from the people who were gunning for him, the responses to his performance were, oh, he's angry, he's a mean, mad white man, right? He's angry and he's entitled, and, you know, he's crying and throwing a tantrum and all of this stuff, right? No, that was a genuine emotional, whether he did it or not, that was a genuine emotional response. Her entire fucking thing was just an act. It was just an act. And I am perfectly fine with women who recount traumatic events and don't tear up, don't cry, don't do any of that stuff, right? Absolutely. Yeah, but you know what? When those women who are not the type of women who are going to cry when recounting something like that, when they recount it, they just recount it. They don't make their voice sound creaky. They don't act like they're on the verge of tears. And they don't talk about how traumatic it was, and it still is, because it's just so, this is so upsetting for me. They don't do that. They don't do that. If they're not if you're not a crier as a woman, you're not going to talk like that. You're only going to talk like that and not cry if it didn't, if you're putting on a fucking show.
Yep.
Oh my God.
Exactly. I'm the type, when I'm really, really angry and frustrated and I feel like I can't do anything, then I can't control my tears. It doesn't mean that I'm sad. It means that I really want to fucking punch someone and I can't. So, but I can't stop it. I can't help those tears, but it's an actual raw emotion. It just, to some people, it looks one way.
Oh yeah, no, with me, like I've done a few videos, right, where I, like, the Anders Breivik video that I did, right? There were 2 times where I was just like, okay, I'm gonna pause recording and I'm gonna go off and I'm gonna try and convince myself to stop crying, right? And then came back, right, and was like, sorry about that, because I don't want people to look at me crying. I don't, like, that's not the performance that I want to give, right? But that's what was in me in the moment, right? So, like, I'm more likely to try and hide the fact that I'm crying, whether it's out of sorrow or frustration or grief or just I guess maybe pessimism and other things like that, right? Like, I mean, every once in a while I really try to extrapolate the current situation into the future, and if I actually take it too many decades into the future and try and predict what's actually lying in wait for my kids and my potential grandkids, I just go on a 6-hour fucking crying jag, right? And I don't want to advertise. I don't want people to see me like that, right? I don't want people to see me breaking down like that, right? But that means that as much as possible, I will try and maintain my composure in any situation that I'm in. I won't try and put on some kind of facade of being, really, really, really upset and grief-stricken and traumatized, but not have to, like, reach for a freaking tissue. That was really telling for me, because I'm always reaching for a fucking tissue, just because of my vasomotor rhinitis. But the fact that she didn't even appear to have a tissue in her pocket to bring out if needed, but yet she put on this facade of being pathetic and victimized, and Jussie Smollett's fucking thing on Good Morning America was more convincing than hers. And Jussie Smollett was like, you could just see through it. You could just fucking see. I'm really trying to cry here. I'm really trying to cry. Oh! I squeezed out a couple of tears, right? Yeah, she couldn't even fucking squeeze out a couple of tears. So I'm just like, yeah.
See, me in that situation, it would have been entirely different. Simply because, like, even if it was true, well, first of all, I wouldn't have been in that situation if it wasn't, right? If I'm gonna go in front of a bunch of people and accuse somebody of doing something, it's because I experienced that. They actually did it. But to have to sit in the middle of a room full of people questioning me and speaking into a microphone with television and cameras and stuff like that, I would not have been in tears. I would have been mostly shut down. I wouldn't have been able to survive on water, and I would have had to have glucose tablets, because I'd have been shaking like a leaf due to adrenaline, bursts of adrenaline, and my blood sugar would have bottomed out. Or at least my body would have responded as though it had. And, but I would not have had that kind of near tears thing at all. And I know this because of all the experiences I've had in my life, and I've had some pretty traumatic experiences, there has only been one that because of the trauma of the experience itself, I have been unable to talk about it at any point in my life without crying. And over time, having to explain and describe that experience to people, I've gotten to the point where, as long as I don't try to give a blow-by-blow detailed rundown from the beginning to the end of the experience, I can talk about it without getting upset. And that was the time that I was in the back of the car during the car accident that almost killed my mom. And I saw her almost die. And I can talk about that experience, and it's still upsetting. It's upsetting to think about it, right? It's I don't want to think about my parents or any of my family members having anything bad happen to them, much less getting killed in a car accident. But that's the really, honest to God, that's the only thing that I've ever been unable to discuss effectively. And that response, that's not the response I have. I will go from a rational sounding discussion to a little bit shrill in discussing it, almost like I kind of sound almost like Don Knotts before I hit the skids and the waterworks start, and and you can tell because when I cry, my tears come out my nose first, so I end up with an upper lip full of snot. I have dry eyes. I end up with an upper lip full of snot before there are tears running down my cheeks.
You just have large drainage ducts, is what it is. So your tears drain your nose.
I also, I have dry eyes, I have dry mouth, I have dry skin, I have dry scalp, dry everything. So that's just the way it is. And it's probably related to the allergies. But in a situation like that, you would still know. You would know damn well that I was in tears. And you would not be able to look at that and say, well, you know, she might just be faking this. Because I would be struggling to control it, because if I start telling that story and I don't finish it, it's that in and of itself is upsetting. I have to make sure people know that my mom survived, right? And I have to make sure people know that she chose to survive, because she had a choice. She could feel it happening, and she had a choice, and she chose to survive. And even now, I got to tell you guys that, right? That's important to me. And that's a detail that nobody would have asked about, and I would have volunteered it anyway in that situation. And I don't think she did that. I didn't see her do that with much of anything. There wasn't anything that it was important for her to get it out. It was, she was acting like a little girl answering questions, and she would dodge things. The indelible in the hippocampus statement was probably the most dead giveaway.
Oh my God! What? I'm sorry, you're a psychology professor, right? And when a congressperson, right, when a senator asks you, do you know what's, how are memories, formed, whatever, blah 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 blah, right? You don't, you're talking to a layman, so you talk to them like they're a layman, right? They're not a neuroscientist. Right, and then it was indelible in my hippocampus, and it's like, what?
Nobody talks like that.
It just absolutely, it's believe me, because I'm an expert.
Yeah, yep, that's essentially what it was. A fallacious appeal to authority, to expertise. So, that situation, and we're told by feminists, by the left, that we're not allowed to question those allegations, that we're monsters for suggesting that there's anything about the way she told her story, anything about the contradictions in her story, the fact that she not only didn't have backup from witnesses, but there were things, there were people involved, basically, in their histories that contradicted her story, And even her own history contradicted her. Well, hang on a second. One more thing.
They were people she said would verify her story, and they were like, yeah, no.
No, they wouldn't. But the other thing was her own statements about her remodeling her home were contradicted by the reality of how it took place. And it was documented. There was documentation that contradicted her story. We're not allowed to pay attention to any of that, right? We're not allowed to notice that, hey, there is evidence. Not only is there no evidence that what she's saying is true, there is a mountain of evidence that what she's saying is false. We're being asked in that situation, and law enforcement is being asked in every situation to ignore those inconsistencies, to smooth over any kind of contradictions, and fight for a conviction. That's not their job. It's not the court's job. It's not what it was created for. It's not why it exists. And the fact that we are seeing this happen now, the fact that we are being pushed as a nation toward a system designed to railroad people in terms of intimate partner and sexual violence accusations, that's extremely disturbing to me. And I do see this as a wedge attack. We're just going to use this loose spot where society's attachment to the civil rights of the accused is a little less tenacious because of their gynocentrism. We're going to use that to pry the standards loose and just get rid of that pesky old presumption of innocence, and get rid of the pesky old standards for evidence, so that the state can come along and use allegations of this nature and potentially allegations of other natures as we go forward from here. With now there's this excuse to eliminate those standards in other cases. Now the state can use those kind of accusations to just get rid of people, right? Now the state can use those kind of accusations to just dominate people. You know, if the state doesn't want you living in a particular area, you've questioned something about your local government, well, you know, we accuse you of something and you go to jail. And you don't have to worry about the trial because, hey, you can't exercise a robust defense. You can't submit exculpatory evidence in your favor, and your accuser's story isn't allowed to be questioned. So why bother with a trial, huh? And that's basically where we're headed. We got a couple more super chats. Mr. Roboto gave us $5 and says, "Does this cougar protect against all cougars or some?" That would be the cougar in Karen's neighborhood. He also says, "Karen, I wish you well and good health." I will let everybody know, you know, my son has had cougar defense training as well, but not to deal with any kind of cat.
I was waiting for that one.
Of course. And then Mr. Roboto gave us $2 and said, "I meant cougar protection." Then we have Mark the Atheist, who gave us $1 and didn't say anything. So I kind of wonder if it was an accident, if there was supposed to be a statement, or if that was intentional.
Mark is a man of few words.
There we go. But yeah. So I guess that is basically the show. I mean, did anybody have anything else to add before I go into the last thing I was going to say?
Nope. I'm coming up blank.
Okay.
I think we've beaten it to death.
We have left Karen speechless. That's pretty good. So the last thing I want to point out is what Save Services, what they put on their website regarding this. They gave a basic rundown. The link to that is in the low bar, or in the opening monologue transcript. But I've added a link to the low bar of this video from that page. The last paragraph, couple of paragraphs, they've said, "On October 1st, 2018, the Department of Justice Office of Violence Against Women. So this goes back to the Violence Against Women Act because it was created, that office was created by the Violence Against Women Act. The Office of Violence Against Women awarded a $400,000 grant to further expand Start by Believing. All told, $8.9 million, so I dramatically underestimated their funding, $8.9 million, mostly from the Department of Justice, has been awarded to this initiative and its related programs. These federal monies will help this initiative, quote, celebrate Start by Believing Day, which is going to be April 3rd of this year.
Oh,
so,
that's
now,
great.
I don't know why they didn't pick April 1st.
Yeah, I do, obviously. But that's going on. That's this year. That's coming up next month, real fast. So what they're asking at Save Services, we urge you to contact Attorney General William Barr. Tell him we should not be, quote, celebrating Start by Believing. Tell him to suspend funding for sham Start by Believing investigations. And they provided a link. That link is in our low bar. It goes to a page where you can send a direct message to the Department of Justice. And it gives you the ability to select a topic, to type in your message. You can leave your email address and your name if you want them to contact you. And I would say there's a couple of different subheadings this could go under. You could say that you're contacting them against violence against women or domestic violence. Again, you can contact them about victims of crime, messages to the Attorney General, to the Deputy General, the Associate Attorney General, whoever you think is going to read your message. But I think their goal was to have you specifically send to the Attorney General and let them know that the American people are noticing this, the fact that the Department of Justice is funding a direct and reprehensible attack on the civilians' right to due process of law anytime there is an accusation, and that it is an absolutely reprehensible use of your tax dollars. That this is something that you paid for, folks. You are paying to have this initiative attack your right to present a robust defense in court if you are falsely accused of a sexual violence act. So this I can't emphasize this enough. Anybody who is from the United States that is listening to this show right now should contact the Department of Justice and just ream the shit out of them for this. And I recommend contacting your congressman too.
In the politest way possible.
Yes, in the politest way possible. Ream the shit out of them in professor speak. But at the same time, contact your congressman, contact your senator, contact the president. If anybody understands the wrongness of false accusations and the absolute vital importance of due process, it should be him. And just, you know, the alarm on this has been sounded, and the protest needs to be loud, clear, definitive, and unrelenting until the government stops funding this. And with that, I will thank everybody for listening, and thanks to my two co-hosts for participating in and helping to make the sausage. Is probably not quite as long because we started late, but it's still more than an hour and a half.
It's like two and a half hours.
Yeah.
Oh wow! Are you kidding me?
Are you kidding me?
Okay, so thanks for the long sausage, guys.
Super long sausage.
Yep, super long sausage. Thanks to everyone who works in the background to make HBR Talk happen. And good night, all.